Tomorrow in New York City, there will be a hearing before a federal judge on whether convicted mob boss John Gotti should get a new trial. 3 times before, the U.S. government had tried and failed to convict him. But in April, Gotti and an underboss, Frank Locascio, were convicted on racketeering charges, including murder. Now the defense claims government prosecutors went too far in getting that conviction, and they'll produce affidavits from at least 2 jurors stating that the trial was unfair, a trial that received national attention.
Hey, pal.
Get out of the way.
The government was happy and relieved that John Gotti was finally convicted.
Today, another milestone in the fight against organized crime. The Teflon is gone, the Don is covered with Velcro, and every charge in the indictment stuck.
But defense lawyers for Gotti and his co-defendant Frank Locascio say the 2 did not get a fair trial and that the government was willing to do anything to get a conviction.
The government excess was ever present. In every aspect of the trial, whether it was in the initial investigatory phase, whether it was in the jury selection phase, whether it was in the kinds of evidentiary rulings that they were able to obtain from the judge.
The government used extensive wiretaps and videotapes in court. Underboss Sammy the Bull Gravano, shown here holding the umbrella, became a government witness against Gotti, testifying that Gotti masterminded the murder of Paul Castellano to take control of the Gambino crime family, and even drove by the murder scene to make sure Castellano was dead. Gotti's longtime lawyer, Bruce Cutler, was thrown off the case by the judge. The judge allowed only 1 of 8 defense witnesses to testify. He sequestered the jury and kept their names a secret.
He's a murderer. He's not a folk hero.
U.S. Attorney Andrew Maloney, in his closing remarks to the jury, told them they would be inhuman if they weren't afraid for their lives. Gotti's lawyers say all these things made an effective defense impossible and that the government wanted a conviction at any price.
Well, I think the government's willing to go to virtually any length. The question is how far are the courts going to permit them to go?
A Supreme Court ruling last week in the death of DEA agent Enrique Camarena ruled that it was legal for the government to kidnap a Mexican citizen and bring him to trial here in the United States. In 1984, a jury acquitted automaker John DeLorean of cocaine trafficking charges, even though the government produced undercover videotapes of DeLorean allegedly making a drug deal. Many jurors felt the government was guilty of entrapment. But when the government showed surveillance tapes of Washington Mayor Marion Barry taking drugs, he was convicted and spent 6 months in jail. John Gotti will be sentenced on Tuesday. His lawyers say an appeal will be based on an overzealous prosecution. Whether the government went too far in trying to convict Gotti will ultimately be decided in the courts. All right, that's the background. Let's talk now to one of the jurors in the Gotti trial who supports the defense claim that the trial was unfair. He does not want his identity to be revealed. Sir, tomorrow you're going to file this affidavit on behalf of the defense. The trial was unfair. Why?
I feel the jurors improperly discussed and voiced opinions on the case. One of the jurors' husband was a former FBI agent. I feel that number 3 was wrongfully excused.
That was one of the members of the jury who was excused.
Yes, and the defense attorneys were constantly being cut off every time they tried to get a certain line of questioning across.
Now, some people have said that members of the jury were intimidated by the prosecutor when he said that you, members of the jury, should be in fear of your life or would be no less than human to have fear. Was that a factor?
I would say so, yes.
Why are you coming forward just now? The trial occurred and the verdict came in a couple of months ago.
It's a matter of conscience. A matter of conscience.
You didn't have a conscience after the verdict came down?
I came forward after the verdict came down.
But you're only going public now.
Yes.
Now, some people who know the background of these trials are going to point out that there have been charges of jury tampering on the part of the defense in previous trials, and that now you are under pressure from the defense to come forward and say these things.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. This is on my own accord.
Do you believe today that John Gotti is innocent?
Yes, I do.
Why?
Why? Because I didn't feel that they produced enough evidence in court to go have a conviction.
You believe he's innocent?
Yes.
All right. Thank you, sir, for being with us today. Let's turn now to some experts who have been involved in this and similar cases. We have Anthony Cardinale, who was one of the defense attorneys for the defendant Frank Locascio on trial with John Gotti. Also, Rudolph Giuliani, a former U.S. attorney in New York City, a prosecutor who's gained a reputation for going after a lot of high-profile, tough figures. Mr. Cardinale, let's start with you. Do you think this kind of an affidavit, this kind of a testimony from a juror is really going to sway the judge and get you a new trial?
Well, one hopes so. I think that many of the things he says, particularly the conversations that took place between and among the jurors and opinions being rendered against the judge's instructions, is something that I think should be taken quite seriously, particularly when one of the people that was voicing the opinions, at least according to this juror, was a woman whose husband was a former FBI agent, something we weren't aware of at all until the middle of the trial, and we attempted to have her removed. But nevertheless, she stayed, and according to this affidavit, and according to this juror, voiced her opinions about the guilt of the defendants against the judge's order. So I think that that was clearly improper.
Now, Mr. Giuliani, here obviously is a defense attorney. They lost the trial. They're trying to get the new trial, get the defendant off. Did the government go too far here?
Not from what I've seen, but of course that's going to be up to the judge and to the United States Court of Appeals. I'd be interested in knowing why that juror voted guilty if the juror thought that John Gotti was actually innocent, is the word that he used. It seems rather extraordinary that even in light of whatever it is that he said happened, that you would vote guilty on all counts beyond a reasonable doubt, including for the crimes of murder.
You should ask him that question.
Well, is the juror still there? Or is the juror gone? I guess the...
Yes.
Juror, can you answer that question? Why did you vote for guilt?
I voted for guilty because I knew the government wanted a guilty conviction, and I was fear of their power had I held out.
What kind of power? Mr. Giuliani, as a prosecutor, is laughing here. What can the government do to you? You're a juror. You're independent.
I have no idea. All I know is from the case that I sat on, I know what they're able to do when they want to get something across.
Well, give us one example. What are they able to do?
To him.
To you? To you?
To me?
Yes.
I don't know, to be honest with you. I have no idea what can they possibly do to me.
Well, then it sounds absurd that he would have been afraid for himself if he has no idea what the government would have done for him. It sounds more likely that he would have been very, very frightened of John Gotti, who on tape in that trial talked about the murder of other human beings. The proof was that he had murdered other people, and the proof against him was about as overwhelming as it could possibly be. And it sounds like the juror, who gives no reason at all for being frightened of the government, was in fact frightened of John Gotti and probably continues to be.
Well, Mr. Cardinale, let's come back to that, because again, many people who are watching this program are going to come to a similar conclusion. They're having the charges of jury tampering. We know the reputation of your clients. We know that one of the Sammy Gravano, who was an associate of Mr. Gotti, admitted in the trial of 19 murders. Yeah. Shouldn't a juror be afraid in this situation?
Well, the interesting thing is, and again, this will be part of the affidavit, and from discussions I had with this individual, by the way, he came forward a day or two after the case. He is now just willing now to come forward publicly. But what he said, and it made a lot of sense to me, and he's still here, you can ask him, is that he was afraid that had he held out for John Gotti, had he kept to his opinion and not been shouted down by others, he would have been on the receiving end of a government indictment, even though he has nothing to gain. He had got nothing from the defense. He's afraid that he's going to be charged with tampering or something like just what Mr. Giuliani said.
There's no history at all ever of a juror being convicted for refusing to vote guilty or not guilty. The juror didn't say that. Mr. Cardinale said that.
Well, ask him.
Okay,
let's ask the juror. Do you think...
Now we've given the juror a reason to give for why it happened. When we asked the juror to give a reason for why he was frightened of the government, the juror just moments ago said he had no reason to be frightened of the government.
Well, we also have a case here, perhaps, where a defense counsel is leading a juror. But juror, do you really feel an indictment against you?
I don't know. I have absolutely no idea.
Well,
all I know is that I was put into a situation where I was very frightened. Had I not gone along with the majority, that maybe something might have been done to me.
But still, okay, use the word might. At the end, Mr. Giuliani...
The juror just made it clear that he had no idea why he was frightened. He certainly wasn't frightened of an indictment. And, I mean, I don't know. The judge is going to have to determine this, but generally the rule of law in America is that jury verdicts are final for very, very good reason, so that this kind of thing can't happen.
Well, anyway, gentlemen, I'm sorry. The hearing is tomorrow. You'll be present at that. We'll see what the judge rules. The sentencing is scheduled for Tuesday for John Gotti and Frank Locascio. Thank you all for being with us. And we'll be back in just one moment.